Hey guys, welcome back to the Who the Fuck is My Rabbi series. In our first episode, we heard from the women who've made allegations about Marc Gafni, and today we're going to explore Aubrey Marcus's continued public support of Marc Gafni. And to understand his choice a little better, I'm going to be commenting on Aubrey's Healing the Wounds of Culture episode, in which Gafni's side of the story is presented and we get to hear Aubrey's perspective on it. The goal, the theme of today really is just to see how spiritual charisma might be used to bypass accountability. For those who are new, I'm Shannon, and I talk about healing embodiment and what it means to reclaim your body after its CSA trauma in general. Lately, we've been doing something a little bit different. This series is about expanding our awareness so that we can get better at taking care of ourselves and each other by looking at some real life examples. And if you haven't seen the Healing the Wounds of Culture episode by Aubrey Marcus, this is a conversation between Aubrey, Marc Gafni, and Marc Gafni's current partner, Christina Kincaid. The episode for me was a little hard to pin down. It feels like they are really trying to it feels like they're trying to talk about Gafni's side of the story without really talking about Gafni's side of the story. It's sort of like we want to set the record straight, but not directly. We want to talk about the wounds of culture as the more important issue, the problem with the internet, so for example. I think the premise of the episode is supposed to be that the way the internet is currently organized is bad. For example, Marc Gafni has continued to be persecuted. Personally, I would say continue to be held accountable, but as nothing is proven and everything's just an allegation, the internet is bad because it allows this man to continue to face what he feels is unfair scrutiny. And they also talk about, needing to stop with the mob mentality and heal the wounds of culture. To be honest, I do agree with that point about letting go of the mob mentality. I think that would really serve us collectively. But I have to admit that I don't really what heal the wounds of culture means. That part went over my head. I'm not fully sure what the heck they were talking about with that. Maybe that's just my brain not operating at full capacity. But either way, this is more or less the container for their conversation in the podcast we're going to look at today. And throughout this, I really encourage everybody to be as curious as possible. Note what you're seeing and what you're hearing, what you feel adds up, what you feel doesn't add up. Does anything that I say make any kind of sense? These are just my opinions, so they shouldn't be taken as gospel or as fact. And to be honest, I can't even figure out what heal the wounds of culture means, so take it with a grain of salt. The whole point, as always, is just to listen and make your own informed choices. So, the best and easiest place to start is at the beginning. So let's take a look at how the conversation with Marc Gafni is set up and how we were introduced to this man.
For people to be born into their unbearable beauty, and from there ethos comes, from there healing sexual abuse comes, from there healing existential risk comes.
The first words we hear from Marc Gafni are about healing SA trauma and being an affront to shame.
Partners in love and life, Dr. Marc Gafni and Christina Kincaid. They're both co-authors on the amazing book, A Return to Eros. Dr. Marc Gafni is also a rabbi that's holding a lineage tradition that he's one of the greatest thinkers I've ever encountered, and I truly believe that his message is here to help guide us from our old story to the new story that can help humanity thrive for eons to come. And please stay tuned to the end of the podcast to hear a message from the heart about some of the reasons why I chose to podcast here again with Dr. Marc Gafni.
And then we have Aubrey here making his pitch. It's interesting that he calls Gafni a rabbi. So I don't know, is it even technically correct to still call him a rabbi? If we remember from our previous episode, Gafni's ordinations have been publicly revoked. So I'm not sure what that actually means. I think if you're a priest and you are excommunicated, you can still call yourself a priest, but you can't act as one. You have to surrender those duties. Is it the same thing if you're a rabbi? Is this technically accurate? Is it correct to still be able to call him a rabbi, or no? If you know, I would love to learn more about that. That would be really interesting to see, that to have a clearer picture of what's happening in this part.
In doing that, you became something of a heretic, of course. Changing the gender of the God that is worshipped. I mean, it's kind of a big deal. And I'm sure in your journey, you came up against a lot of resistance from conservative, traditional Jewish faith, saying like, whoa, like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, and it's funny that the resistance isn't particularly from what you would think are the orthodoxies. In other words, but the sense of the sense of rivalrous conflict, right, governed by win-lose metrics, actually moves throughout organized religion, and of course, Hebrew wisdom is no exception.
There you go. We are introduced to Gafni as a rabbi and as somebody who wants to heal SA trauma. He is a visionary who ruffles the feathers of organized religion because he has been seeking the she in spiritual texts. He's kind of adding or changing the gender of God. We're presented with a man who is soft-spoken, gentle, and devoted to the goddess, and she has been by his side since he entered rabbinical school.
I was trying to find her, and yet I was operating deep in a set of establishments that felt it threatening. That the embodiment of it was threatening. And so there was a dance, and it was a painful, poignant, ecstatic dance in which many vessels were shattered. There's a lot of shattered vessels. There's
Sure.
broken hearts and broken vessels. And it's the only way we can actually birth and be in devotion to she.
To me, this introduction, it's sort of trying to subtly establish or set us up with the motive, the smear campaign that we're going to be introduced to later on. They are creating the tone and the direction for the conversation to come, and in doing that, and the way that they're doing that, it feels like they're skipping past some really vital information. This setup reminds me a lot of a trolley, of a shopping cart that has that one dodgy wheel, so it's always veering off from where you want it to go, no matter how hard you keep trying to push it in the right direction. That's that's the image that comes to mind when I'm listening to this.
Considerably come up against these structures. And we'll talk about, some of the ways that this has transpired, of course, because there's, a big issue to discuss on the table. But ultimately, the framework is that regardless of which way your life has gone, you've been someone who's been flipping over the tables of established thought and codification and the idea that people know something in there.
So it feels like there's a lot of assumed knowledge. If I was just a fan of Aubrey's and I was tuning in because I saw a new episode had come out, I would feel like I was missing out on something. I would ironically have to feel like I wanted to go and Google who Gafni is. And that's ironic given that, Aubrey himself later talks about, his heart sinking when people do that because of the information that comes up about Gafni when you Google him. And Gafni bangs on about continuing to be vilified by the internet. So it would have made more sense to me if, rather than dance around the issue, they made a direct statement about what they plan to discuss and why they're here to discuss it. It would have been helpful to us as the viewers, and it would have really strengthened the foundation that this conversation is taking place on. But the best that we really get is that vague suggestion that vessels and hearts have been broken along the way, but what that means, whose hearts, what vessels, that's never really clarified. So we don't get a strong sense of where this conversation is going, or even really a clear idea of what it's supposed to be about. It feels very opaque to me at this point.
Christina, I want to go into your story a little bit because obviously, massively successful career as a model. But through that process, you incurred some trauma, sexual trauma, which, I haven't been with a partner that's not experienced that. And it's It's not like I'm.
We then get to meet Christina Kincaid, Gafni's partner. I will be honest and say that I find her presence really challenging in this episode, not because of Christina herself, but because of the context that she is appearing herein.
Journey to heal, but tell us a bit of your journey through that process.
Yeah. I didn't understand, probably like a lot of your partners, what had happened to me until later in my life. I started having trigger memories when I was in my 20s and I was modeling and having this career, and where just waves and waves of ecstasy were just penetrating my being. I was in this orgiastic state for probably a half an hour. And it was, the way I can describe it was like having an encounter with divine love. And she broke me open from the inside. She just fucked me open, literally, like on the floor there. I was at her, I'll say my greatest mercy in terms of, the visitation from her. And I just, after it was over, I just laid there and I heard, this is the path of living with an open heart. And like I said, I just felt this divine love. It was an encounter with divine love itself that was so overwhelming that I let it integrate. And that night when I went to bed, I heard my guidance say, you have to ask him to be your teacher.
I have some questions about this segment. When I watched it, I was really engrossed in her story. It's very moving. It's very emotional. I have a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion for what she has been through. But when she finished telling her story and, Aubrey comes back in, Gafni comes back in, I had a moment of feeling like I had just come back up for air, and I was like, hang on, wait, what? What just happened? How did we get here? The burning question on my mind at the end of it was, hang on a minute, how was her SA story relevant to the conversation? Moving though it was, why do we need to hear it? And then watching the whole podcast front to back, that same question is there at the end of it for me. Why did we need to hear her essay story? Because to me, it feels like if you were to just lift out that segment and cut that part of her story and just have Christina say, for example, hi, I'm Christina, and then you just keep the last maybe like 3 to 5 minutes of that part where she's describing, going to the workshop with Gafni and asking Gafni to be her mentor. That feels like it would be sufficient to justify her presence. It wouldn't cause the episode to feel out of balance or as if there was, a missing piece of information. So when I was reflecting on it, why was that necessary? The only conclusion that I could come to was another question, which is she there just to make Gafni look better? Gafni has multiple sexual misconduct accusations, as we know, but Christine has also experienced real trauma and she trusts him regardless. And then we can see at the end of the conversation, how Aubrey works to draw out of her that sense of trust.
Of wild allegations that have circulated the internet, and you having been a victim of sexual abuse, was it hard, or did just your encounter with him cause you to just trust him by the expression of his being, and so it was already resolved in your mind?
It was already resolved in my body mind.
Right.
It was that I knew. I knew. I didn't. I knew. That's the only way I can just articulate it.
I don't have to question the public information anymore because of my feelings. These are my words. These are not hers. But what I got from that is that if you knew him, you wouldn't doubt him. You wouldn't even worry about the public accusations because of the way he makes you feel. You would just trust him implicitly and know that none of it could be true. And so is that supposed to prop Gafni up? Is that there as evidence that this is a trustworthy person? And if that is the case, to me, I think it does the opposite. To me, if you are somebody that would take a person who has experienced, quite significant trauma and you would pop them on a pretty large public platform and then have them tell that story for your own benefit. I mean, that's not really a person that I can respect or trust. It would be a totally different situation if Christina had come on with a really strong sense of purpose and of agency and was like, I'm here to stand by my man. I'm here to tell my story because, if I've been through these horrific things and I still trust Gafni and I have never known him to be anything but a safe man. That would be respectable, and the transparency would make the interview feel a lot more credible and just professional also. And instead, we get that opaqueness that I was talking about at the start. It's like we're not really talking about it. Like we're gonna slide Christina in here, so and people will get the point. Like they'll understand, what this is trying to do. They'll understand the subtle implications of her being here, and that really doesn't sit well with me. That let's talk about it, but let's not really talk about it. Let's just like insert her and let people just sort of understand what's happening. I also had to wonder if Christina and Gaffney's relationship showed a habit or a theme of students becoming sexual partners, because she does say that she had this tremendous experience with Gaffney, and then her instinct was to take him on as a mentor, and now here they are as life partners. And so, another question that I have is, what are the ethics in a situation like that?
Devotion to his students, the people that he works with, and just tireless devotion and love and gifting. And he's a man who truly walks the path of an outrageous lover. I've actually never met anybody like him. It's true.
And you're in the position to know him,
Yeah.
to know him more than anyone. You are his outrageous lover, and he holds the same regard.
So it's really not hard for the line between the teacher and the teachings to become blurred when you are in or have been in a place of pain, and then you begin to work with somebody who makes you feel something completely new. That new feeling can really easily be transferred onto the teacher out of gratitude for facilitating it. And I know that I've had my own experiences with this. Not that I've ended up in any kind of a romantic relationship with somebody who's helped me, but I did some amazing, amazing breath work when I was working on my own CSA trauma. And this holotropic breath work with the teacher that I worked with was pivotal. Honestly, I would credit her with being the linchpin at a really crucial moment in my life and in my healing journey. And when you have that experience, when you feel that those big changes and that big energetic opening, you can't help but put a little bit of that on the teacher for being amazing. And they do deserve some credit, absolutely, for the amazing work that they're doing. But it can very quickly get murky or messy, especially if you are working with a teacher who is morally gray, let's say, and might be available to taking advantage of somebody's good feelings in a situation like that. And so for me, my personal belief is that in these situations, the onus is always on the teacher, the facilitator, the mentor to maintain the appropriate boundaries. Christina and Gaffney, they I don't know anything about their relationship. It seems fine, so I'm not gonna worry about commenting on that. What I'm more interested in is the student-teacher dynamic in general, because that's always been so controversial because of the power, dynamics in those relationships. And the argument that I want to put forward is that whenever a teacher, leader, facilitator has spiritual authority, and especially if they're in some way able to alter states of consciousness, be that through breath work or psychedelics or dance or hypnosis or meditation, that there should never ever be sexual contact or a romantic relationship with the student, and that starting a relationship with a student in this context is really no different to being seduced by your therapist. And this is why it's helpful to understand the terms transference and erotic transference. If it's not something you're already familiar with, it can potentially save you a lot of confusion in the future. So, in psychology, transference refers to the unconscious redirection of feelings and desires or the projection of unresolved feelings onto another person. So, for example, you might start to see your therapist as a kind of maternal figure. To some degree, we've all experienced, or you've pretty likely experienced, a fairly benign form of transference. Maybe you've had a colleague that reminds you of your little brother, so you kind of scoop them up and take them under your wing, and feel very protective of them, or maybe not, maybe the opposite, depending on your relationship with your siblings. They can also be countertransference, and this is when the teacher or the therapist projects their feelings onto the client or the student, because even though they have, this training or this extensive spiritual background, it's still humans being humans, and they're not immune to normal human emotions. We also have another term, which is erotic transference. And this is when people may feel romantically or sexually attracted to their therapist, coach, mentor. Erotic transference can be the result of building an emotionally intimate relationship with a person, perhaps for the very first time. Maybe you've been betrayed or experienced trauma. Maybe you're a naturally very stoic and reserved person. And this professional relationship is the first time that you've actually let somebody in and been vulnerable and been vulnerable with them. And so this is happening in a professional setting, that emotional intimacy, that's quite a big thing. And that new feeling of safety in your body, it's easy to mistake it for romantic feelings. And just to add an extra layer of complication, there may be genuine physical attraction to make it more confusing. Maybe you're a hottie, maybe your therapist or your coach is a hottie, maybe you're two hotties working together at this really big moment of transformation in your life. And if the attraction is felt by both people at the same time, then that can be really powerful. I imagine that would feel quite magnetic and profound. And there is another layer to be mindful of with erotic transference also, and that's for people who have a history of sexual trauma, because they may confuse connection with sexual intimacy or attraction just because of how they were mistreated. So unconsciously, it can feel like a necessary transaction. Physical intimacy in exchange for emotional intimacy. Again, just because of the way a person has been mistreated. Both forms of transference are really common and normal and nothing to be ashamed of. Again, just humans being humans doing human things. A healthy therapeutic relationship, both forms need to be addressed and worked with in the appropriate manner, which may include needing to sever the relationship if that is what serves both people. In the context of a client therapist dynamic, what I've learned in my research is that actually one of the top ethical violations is forming a romantic relationship with your client. And my argument is that this also applies to teacher-student dynamics when the nature of the work being done together is therapeutic spiritual work, because the power imbalance, it's just too great, and the chance of transference or counter transference is also really high. And I believe that the role of the mentor is to protect the more vulnerable person. I believe that if you are in a position of authority as a spiritual leader, teacher, coach, whatever, you are obligated to have enough self mastery to always be able to act in the best interest of the student, even if there is mutual attraction. I mean, again, humans being humans, I wouldn't expect that anybody is going to get it right 100% of the time or handle it perfectly 100% of the time, but you should be able to do what serves the more vulnerable person. You you have to be able to do. what serves the more vulnerable person in the relationship. And this is why the best work is done, I believe, with teachers who are really upfront about their values and their ethics, so you know what you're getting from the get-go. And unfortunately, we do have many examples in the public now of how things can go south pretty quickly when we're working with shady teachers. So I would recommend checking out the Power Trip podcast. This is absolutely amazing, especially if you're involved in the plant medicine world. Actually, I would go so far as to say if you're involved in the plant medicine world, this is almost required listening. Not to look for things to fear or to increase paranoia or judgment or blame or any of these things, but just to get a fuller picture of what's going on so that you can make informed choices and take better care of yourself and the important people in your life. Cults to Consciousness is also another really great resource. And more on the educational side of things, I would recommend checking out Angel DeSantis. She has this amazing 3-part series that she made actually in response to the radical monogamy episode. And I learned so much from it. I would super recommend it just because it is that she has such a wealth of knowledge that she is generous enough to share publicly. So those would be my recommendations if you wanted to do your own research and dig a little bit deeper.
It's hard to explain to other people. You read things online and wild things online, and then it's like, but then you're there. You feel it, and I feel you, and I feel like what feels like the truth. And it's like, yeah, all right, we could go through the hundreds of thousands of words and the letter from Sally Kempton and Daniel Schmachtenberger and Barbara Marx Hubbard and Ken Wilber and all of this analysis of this thing and the polygraph tests that, show, according to this polygraph, a less than 1% chance of deception and all of this whole stuff where you can use your logical mind to try and figure out how the stories arrived and where the stories got askew. And that's all valuable. And I think that's all important because the mind needs to settle itself as well. But it's the feeling. And if people are asking me, which they do, like, Aubrey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And it's like, I'm telling you guys, like I feel it, like you felt it.
After the conversation with Christina, we start getting into the real meat and potatoes of the podcast. Aubrey and Gafni, they begin moving towards discussing the allegations.
In the public commons, we've got this tragedy of the commons, which is unimaginable. And what was it that the jurist Blackstone said? He said, better 100 guilty men go free than one guilty man be hung. And Jefferson said, better 1,000.
This one I just wanted to include because I thought it was a funny little Freudian slip. I had never heard the quote when I first watched this, but it didn't sound right, so I Googled it, and this is what it's supposed to be saying, and that's not what he says. So I don't know. I thought that was just a little funny Freudian slip.
Keke was just relating, she was just in Mexico, and we've heard it from many people in deep love and honor to Mexico, and from so many friends I've heard they're in Mexico and something goes wrong. And they want to go to the local authorities and something was stolen. They realize that the local authorities were somehow involved in that story. And all of a sudden they realize, oh, we're not in America. Right? We're like, right? And so how we evaluate information. And she's blessed me, Aubrey, right? In other words, meaning I'm standing and I'm strong because of her. She's raised me up. She's been inside of me and she broke my heart open.
What we hear a lot more of in this part is spiritual bypassing. That's the shifting, the opacity, the avoidance of directly addressing, what led to this podcast episode, what we've already been hearing about. And from this point on, I mean, we've already heard so much spiritual bypassing, I think, but from here it gets real thick. So I think it's worth doing a little side quest into the world of spiritual bypassing to understand it a little bit better, especially if this is a new or newish concept for you. Spiritual bypassing is when spiritual beliefs or practices, including plant medicines, are used to avoid dealing with difficult or unresolved emotional psychological issues. It's also used to avoid underdeveloped parts of ourselves. If you are serious about your personal growth, mental health, or healing journey, being able to identify the signs of spiritual bypassing is integral to building self awareness. I know myself that I have fallen into spiritual or intellectual bypassing also when I'm dancing around something that is really difficult to integrate. And being able to recognize when I'm doing that and call bullshit on myself has been immensely helpful. And so here are some signs that you can look out for just to see if you've maybe slipped into a little bit of spiritual bypassing. Pretending that things are fine when they are clearly not. Cognitive dissonance, repressing or detaching from your emotions, maybe a little bit of casual dissociation, and an avoidance of anger. Good vibes only. There is an overemphasis of positivity and an avoidance of anything negative, like the shadow or core wounds. Numbing or dulling negative emotions or emotions that are perceived to be negative with spiritual practices, including plant medicines and even things as light as meditation to avoid the feelings and to numb them. Everything happens for a reason. So, using mantras to enable and disempower rather than to guide. You might be hearing or saying things like, you chose this so you could learn, the classic, everything happens for a reason, I'm right where I'm supposed to be. And not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, those mantras and affirmations, they can be helpful. They can be great for your mindset. They can also keep us stuck if we become too attached to them and we begin to use them to avoid facing the reality of our situation. There is a really wonderful woman. Her name is Anna Runkle. She has a fantastic channel called The Crappy Childhood Fairy. And she does a whole segment that talks about spirituality and spiritual language and how it can sometimes be disempowering rather than serve us. And one thing that she describes is hearing from a lot of the men and the women that she works with who are in very toxic relationships say things like, this I was meant to be in this relationship because this is here to teach me a lesson. Everything that I'm going through, all this misery and this suffering, it's I'm where I'm supposed to be so that I can learn something. But as she says, relationships that leave you feeling demoralized are not learning exercises, they are crushing you. And I wholeheartedly agree. Sometimes you are not where you need to be. Sometimes you genuinely need to get the fuck out. Overly symbolic or poetic language. So, using beautiful spiritual language to create the illusion of enlightenment or doing the work. That sounds highly manipulative. For the vast majority of people, that is more about self deception than trying to manipulate anybody else. That's sort of tricking ourselves into feeling like we are doing the things, even though we might actually be dancing around them a little bit. There absolutely are people who are definitely using very symbolic and poetic language and very flowery phrases to manipulate you and draw you in. That's a small percentage. For the vast majority of people, this sign or symptom, it's more about self-deception than anything else. Magical thinking is another sign of spiritual bypassing. Things like, if I just manifest hard enough, spending a lot of time in your imagination and in trying to manifest. And that often goes hand in hand with self judgment and shaming, because if you're not manifesting the dream life, it's because your vibration is not high enough or something like this. And as opposed to maybe just pausing and checking in to see if am I just trying to self-regulate or self-soothe with a little bit of magical thinking and daydreaming because I'm quite stressed or overwhelmed or feeling a lot of uncertainty at the moment. Always rising above rather than going through it. With spiritual bypassing, there is a big need to rise above the human experience. You are constantly trying to rise above your emotions, and you spend a lot more time in the spiritual realm than in the here and now. Spiritual superiority. This one, there's a little bit of arrogance that comes with spiritual bypassing. A sense that you are making the more spiritually superior choice. Like, for example, I'm letting go of negative energy to expand and continue growing, and I'm not going to get bogged down by the negativity. I'm just going to stay with the love and the light. And that's fine. That's lovely. But sometimes that is we're framing ourselves as being a little bit superior because we're not going to get bogged down by negativity. But what we're really doing is just trying to avoid having a difficult conversation with somebody, or holding a boundary, or taking responsibility for our own actions, or trying to invite somebody else to take responsibility for their actions. So maybe let's look at a couple of examples that might help us get a better picture of what this can look like in practice. So using poetic or very fluid or very spiritual language, um, a person might say, for example, I hold a deep privacy, as opposed to simply taking ownership of their personal preferences by saying, I'm a private person. The former also sounds to me like a little bit of a spiritual practice. I'm holding a deep privacy instead of it being just a personal preference. And so I think that also can maybe be perceived as a little bit of spiritual superiority. Another way to bypass accountability would be to mythologize your story. So if we say something like, this was something I had to go through, it was part of my dharma, the pain, the betrayal, it was sacred, it was mine to carry. Then we could transform any public accusations made against us into a spiritual trial of a great mystic who has to suffer to grow, as opposed to a regular man who's come under fire for sexual misconduct allegations. And in my view, doing something like that would steer the story away from any concrete information. It would subtly dismiss claims made by real people, because now we're in your story of personal growth, and subjective feelings are now more valuable than objective reality. And that's the type of thing that can make you feel absolutely batshit crazy if you're on the receiving end of it, or it can get you stuck in a web of a charming spiritual leader if they are trying to recruit you.
About someone was supposed to
Right.
inform me of this before the podcast. It didn't happen. I ran straight into the erotic and the holy.
Right.
Finished that holy work. And
What a
was
time
just
we had.
So excited to meet you here at another room in this fine hotel here that we love in Miami, and went through this whole thing. And then I was hit with it. So it was actually, I got a different experience, which I feel very blessed to have gotten, because I don't know if I would have made it through the lake
Right.
without. It was like it was this interesting gift from she, you could say, in which I didn't have to do that. But then I go out and I tell the story and I say, oh, you won't believe this transmission that's come through. And I've been seeking spiritual wisdom in every different way. And I'll say, this is unbelievable. And then I've seen someone right there on the phone, Google search you.
Right.
So you can kind of see, like, even before we get to the end of the show, we do get to see how Aubrey feels about the situation and about Marc Gafni. And that we also get some clues about his perspective, because it sounds like he's choosing to look at very specific information. Like he's very nitpicky with the sources that he's choosing to take his information from.
That pseudo ecstasy that violates human personhood, that violates fair principles of information gathering. And I've said, most of the issues on the web, the two core ones that are most circulated, are from 40 years ago, just to get the context, right? And a set of issues that, the same group of people, all the people that were involved in these sets of issues all know each other, they're all connected. There's not a kind of pattern. There's a kind of what Daniel calls false pattern recognition. There's collapsed timelines, but none of that is the issue now. But
So this is a very long podcast and there's a lot of waffling in it. And I say that as somebody who loves to waffle. This waffling is like, this is a lot of waffling. So I'm just going to sort of summarize in a nutshell what they say when they talk about the accusations. Gafni has been victimized by the internet and a group of people who know each other and have decided to orchestrate a smear campaign. It all took place on the internet. There has been no conversation, no real life conversation. Gafni will talk to anyone about anything in a mediated setting, but nobody has taken him up on this. Gafni is on the podcast as a true king stands for justice, and everyone gets their day to address the claims against them. So I guess this is Aubrey giving Gafni his day. In essence, Gafni had a consensual and legal relationship with a 14-year-old when he was 19. There was no sex, it was teenage necking. She wrote him a beautiful letter that he did not keep. The two core issues are 40 years old and thus not relevant to the present because it's not something that he's doing now. Gafni took a polygraph test that shows a less than 1% chance of deception, and if you want to know more about anything, go to Marc Gafni's website. He doesn't want to go into it, and he doesn't want to use anyone's names out of respect, though his lawyer told him before this episode that it's okay for him to talk about anything that he wants. Anything that looks like a pattern is actually a false pattern. There were no complaints in Israel. The police rejected the complaints. All relationships in Israel were consensual, which is proved by emails that he does in fact have. Okay, so since I have no editing, filming, or prior skills as an investigative journalist, this is taking quite a lot of time to put together, which my hair is actually 2 inches shorter than it was when I made my first video. I've grown 2 inches of hair and had time to cut it since then. So this has taken a minute to put together, which I only mention because in that time, Lisa Engels, she's a former member of Gafni's inner circle, has come forward with video testimony. And I'm going to share a little segment from her video testimony because she talks about Gafni's website and the emails that he kept from Israel. And as Gafni's innocence, especially in this podcast episode, appears to rest really heavily on both of those things, I think it's worth hearing her out.
Where I'm going, where am I going here? Well, where I'm going is that I know this site very intimately because I was the one that helped create it back in 2016, which is the last but not the first time that Marc Gafni faced a reckoning from those that he harm that was justified at that time as part of a larger mission, according to Marc Gafni, to evolve public culture. So I became one of Marc Gafni's students in 2015, and then I eventually found myself in part of his inner circle back when the organization was called the Center for Integral Wisdom. So my official role in that organization was executive vice president and director of marketing. So I'm not just someone from the outside. I was really in the inside and one of his students. And I conducted many of the interviews in that long list of videos intended to set the record straight and clear Marc Gafni's name. And Marc is still using those same videos that I helped to create, that I appear in, to try to clear his name and promote a version of himself that isn't accurate and isn't true at all. So here's what I want to say, and to make clear, is that I left Marc Gafni's community in 2019 under extremely painful circumstances because of what I came to see as his repeated abuse of power. I do not in any way stand by any of the content that I helped create to defend him that's on that website. I want to make that clear. This video is my way of setting the record straight. It's also my step in making amends for the harm that I know that I caused by participating in creating and distributing those videos, harm that I caused, especially to the women who suffered abuse by Marc Gafni, including Sarah and Judy and Donna and Haya. And so I want to offer my deepest apologies directly to all of you. And optimistic. And I was drawn in by Marc's idea that the solution to our global crisis was a new story of reality, what he called an outrageous love story. And in that process, Marc handed over to me hundreds of emails that he had saved from years prior. These were emails from all the women who had spoken publicly about his abuse, like Donna Zerner, Haya Lester, again, his ex-wife, many others. He also gave me correspondences from rabbis, co-workers, other key figures who had left his organization that he believed were conspiring against him. And so I dove really deep into this project, and I was ignoring the signs that didn't fit that the narrative that Marc was a victim of this decades-long smear campaign. So what happened was, at a certain point, after literally hundreds of hours of reading through emails, articles, transcripts, blog posts, interviews, something started to click for me, something started to shift, patterns began to emerge, and details that I had been previously glossing over started to stand out for me, and this entire narrative that Marc Gafni was the victim of a massive smear campaign began to unravel. It began to crumble. And what I realized was that Marc had placed in my hands the very evidence that revealed his abuse of power, including emails that didn't just suggest poor judgment, but that showed clear patterns of manipulation and coercion and control. And it was like...
So there's just some food for thought. And coming back around to Gafni and Aubrey's conversation about the allegations, I have some notes. I have some thoughts. I have some notes about it. The first thing that I wanted to address is Marc Gafni's claim that he'll have a mediated conversation with anybody. His sort of heavy sigh of resignation when he says that, of course, no one has taken him up on that offer. It's supposed to suggest that he's innocent, but if the allegations happen to be true, it actually does the opposite. If you remember from the previous episode, who the fuck is my rabbi? It can take a victim up to 20 years just to come to terms with what happened to them and report it, and 30 to 40 years if there is spiritual abuse involved. So putting forward the argument that nobody wants to talk to me about it, therefore I'm innocent, well, that's just not really how it works. So that's not good enough. Particularly if the abuser is good at manipulation, nobody wants to put themselves in a position to be mind fucked again. And then there is everything that is noticeably absent or just glossed over in this conversation. So, number one, Judy Mitzner. She only gets a very passing mention when Gafni says the two core issues, but we don't see any inquiry into her allegation. Sarah's age gap with Gafni is briefly acknowledged. He admits that she was too young for him to marry or to wait to marry. But the implications of a 19-year-old being with a 14-year-old are never explored. I have no idea how Aubrey actually feels about that, if he thinks it's appropriate. Would Aubrey let his own daughter date a guy in that situation? Would he be proud of his son if he found out that his 19-year-old was, hooking up with a 14-year-old? Love to know about that, but it's not present in the conversation. Which brings me to the next point, and that's the sense that Aubrey doesn't make a serious inquiry at all into the accusations. Would love to hear some questions like, how did Gafni meet Sarah or the women in Israel? Did Sarah's family know? Can anybody corroborate the story, her story or his story? Sarah claims that he was her tutor. Is that true? Did he sleep at her house, as she says? Why did he say she was 14 going on 35? That's a really that sentence pops up a lot when it comes to Gafni. So I would be really surprised if Aubrey has not heard that. And I I would want to know some context about it. And Dr. Phil, he rants about how, like, that was just completely blown out of proportion, out of context. Well, here's your opportunity. Make it make sense. I would also have loved to hear a question about why Gafni transitioned from rabbi to New Age teacher, because that seemed to be a direct consequence of everything that happened to him, of all the allegations. So that could have been really, really interesting to hear about. It could have given us, some great perspectives and insight into, everything that happened. And and speaking of Gafni's life as a rabbi, what happened in Israel? What were the complaints and who made them? The public dismissal of Gafni as a rabbi isn't disclosed, as we touched on at the start of this podcast. And I think it's a pretty crucial piece of context. We don't get in this conversation, a coherent timeline of events or accusations. So it's really hard to contextualize the controversies. It's all just sort of happening. There's no real concrete evidence, well, in my opinion, there's no real concrete evidence of innocence or new information being presented here that would cause me to doubt the allegations that have been put forward about Gafni. If this was the only thing that I had to watch to either, feel like he is completely innocent or to have reasonable doubt, I would not be persuaded by this conversation. What gets put forward is we have Christina, if that's what she's there to do. Uh, she's there. We have the emails, but we also have Lisa Engels now and her statement. So, maybe that's gotten a little bit wobbly. We're presented with information about Gafni being, a bit of a heretic because he was changing the gender of God, and so maybe that is why uh, his adversaries wanted to make a smear campaign against him. Uh, we also have the polygraph, but we know that that's pretty thin and not really as substantial as they make it out to be. And then there is also Gafni's devotion to she being put forward as, proof of his purity. But I actually think that works. I think that's another thing that works against him, because when I watch this, that devotion, there's a lot of it that feels a lot more obsessive And there are even moments when it sounds possessive. And those are two energies that can definitely take you down a dark road. So I don't really count that devotion, that seeming meekness as being proof of innocence. He kind of feels a little bit more like a fox in a chicken coop to me. Um, we also don't get in this conversation any clear ethical framework. As male figures who hold considerable amounts of power and influence, it would have been really great if they could have articulated what responsibility looks like when you're working with vulnerable people. Real life examples, not this bullshit about archetypes and symbols and the king and justice and all of that fucking shit. What are the lines? Where are the boundaries? Give us an example of what you're about. Actually, I would have been really interested also to hear an example of what you are not about. What is an example of when you've seen someone cross a line and you've been like, "Whoa, that was not okay. I would never do that." That would have been really super interesting. And also when they are going into this conversation about the allegations, there isn't really any pushback from Aubrey. He lets Gaffney speak unchallenged, even when Gaffney is making claims that directly conflict with publicly available information. And the thing that infuriates me about all of this is Aubrey and Gaffney avoid naming any of the women directly. Instead, they use really depersonalizing language like principal accusation, the stories, the core issues. Aubrey doesn't push for names or try to humanize the women. I can't believe he just lets Gaffney get away with calling Sarah and Judy the two core issues. He even doesn't even use Sarah's name. He just refers to her himself as the principal issue. My God, this doesn't come across to me as a hard conversation being facilitated by a man who really wants to find what's true. When we get to Israel as an example, it's actually Aubrey who immediately throws up a wall to prevent any clarification of what happened.
I didn't know if I'd be able to recover material that had been deleted from my computer. So I didn't know if I'd ever be able to recover.
And these were, just to get people clear, there was accusations when you were in Israel.
This is and with that,
I don't want to go deep down the rabbit hole, but just for people to understand what recovering the information is.
That's right. There were a set of claims to people.
I just would like to know why. Who is that serving? What is that serving? Aubrey isn't new to this. He's a seasoned podcast host. I've seen him in the past ask really thoughtful questions and take conversations deeper. But that discernment doesn't seem to be present in his exchange with Gaffney. He does seem to do that, I think, with Christina when he wants something out of her, but I don't see him do that with Gaffney. And because of the way that this conversation is handled, we lose quite a lot. We lose the chance to get closer to the truth or at least a fuller picture. Instead, what this looks like to me is a PR sweep, is a PR spin. This is just a curated, controlled narrative. We lose the ability to make informed decisions based on facts, timelines, named individuals. The humanization of the women who spoke out is lost. And I mean, I honestly feel like the integrity and the credibility in Aubrey's platform as a place for authentic dialogue has just crumbled, gone, doesn't exist anymore. Not in my opinion anyway. And one of the biggest losses is, I think, the opportunity to demonstrate what it looks like to hold space for truth and accountability and to get to see a man stand up for women and push to find the truth instead of performative spirituality. To stand up not for this archetype of the feminine, but real fucking women who've said real things. That would have been amazing to see. And it doesn't come across to me in this at all. And I find it really, really, really hard to stomach. In all of the backlash to the radical monogamy podcast, one thing that really surprised me when I was following along was how healing it was actually, surprisingly, to see the feedback that men were giving to Aubrey about how they didn't agree with him or, what their values and their standards were. And that really meant a lot, surprisingly, because I mean, it's just not every day that you get to see a man calling out another man about how he's treating a woman, I think. So that was really, really moving, really touching to see. And I mean, I wish that had been present in this conversation, but it just doesn't seem to be. And it's not like Gafni hasn't been called out publicly by men and by women as well. There's a whole list of people who have been willing to come forward, people, publications, and not just people in the Jewish community, but also in the New Age space when he transitioned from being a rabbi to this New Age author and leader. They've also been willing to call him out. So in this podcast, what I see are two men who are claiming to be in complete and total devotion to she. One man has the chance to prove it by doing the hard thing, having a difficult conversation, probing, questioning, and trying to look at both sides so that he can be certain that he has the whole story and not just the one that he wants to hear. And I don't think he does that. Instead, what I see him do is help to devalue words that, yeah, maybe they have been a little overused, but they still hold water.
There was never one accusation. The way it always worked was all of a sudden you had a dozen eyewitness testimonies of a woman being a witch. Now just notice the demonization. A witch means you're demonized. You're dehumanized. And when the context was religious, you used witch. Today on the internet, we use narcissist or sociopath, right? Or, right, there's a whole language, which is our secular psychological language for witch.
Or predator.
Or predator. And we diagnose, right?
Narcissist, sociopath. I mean, these are words that Gafni has been called, so I can understand him wanting to devalue them. But Aubrey throws in predator, and I just didn't understand that at all. What is that supposed to do? Now we can't call out predators. How do we point to harm that has been done? The other man in this conversation, he appears to just change the meaning of words to suit his narrative. He's sidestepping accusations, and I think he's trying to position himself as the victim. That's why he's changing the meaning of words. He uses manipulative language, calling what he's experienced name grape.
The early feminists so beautifully wrote that rape, the horror of rape, is not only to the body, it's the rape of the soul, right? It's the rape, they talked about the rape of a name, right? And these powerful women who brought this new wave of the emergence of the feminine into being.
He uses manipulative language like name grape. I think it's so wild. Of all the possibilities, for how he could have chosen to describe his experiences with the public accusations, the multitude of ways and the multitude of words and phrases he could have picked, he lands on name grape. I was gonna say that feels like a subtle flipping of roles, but I don't think that that's subtle. I think that's pretty straight in your face saying, I am not the one who abuses. I am the one who has been abused. And this man, the word audacity comes into mind because he sits next to his partner who has been through real significant trauma that she herself has told us about. And then he appears to change the definition of sexual abuse.
When you think of what it means to have your name abused or your name raped or to have sexual abuse, meaning the abuse of the sexual through telling falsehoods about it, through distorting it, through passing it through a prism of memory, and then, right, that experience is unimaginable.
So if you didn't catch that, the words he's using are, when you think of what it means to have your name graped or to have SA, meaning the abuse of the sexual through telling falsehoods about it, through distorting it, through passing it through a prism of memory. That experience is unimaginable. I'm sorry, what? What? What are you trying to say? Are you saying that is being lied about, is that somehow akin to SA? What are you saying? What does that mean? It's just nuts. It's really, really it's It's nuts. I don't even have the words to properly describe how I feel about all of that. Also, when he talks about name grape, and he describes there that it comes from the feminists. I only did a very cursory glance to fact check that, and I couldn't find anything. But again, it was a very cursory glance. So if you happen to know anything about feminism, and if you're familiar with this concept, I would love to know more about it, because when I did my quick little search and didn't turn anything up, that then felt like more massaging to me, like more massaging of words and meanings to suit his narrative. But I would love to know. If you know, please drop a comment and help shed light on the situation. Listening to this episode, because of things like that, this massaging of words, I can see how you could easily get lost. This is a very esoteric world where the meaning of words is changed and nothing is really addressed directly. Everything keeps shifting and changing. And Gafni, I noticed, is really great at talking about something that you can agree with and then putting it next to his own things so that the two feel connected without him actually needing to show how they are linked. So he'll go on a big dialogue about the Salem witch trials and about Indiana Jones and that kind of thing. And then when we are really connected emotionally and invested emotionally in that thing, he then sort of just slides his own little story into it. So then without even noticing or realizing it, you transfer all of that energy and emotion onto his thing. And he doesn't even actually have to tell you this is like a witch trial because of what I experienced. It's just this thing was bad. And then look, my thing was bad too, wasn't it? Very, very manipulative. And the way language is used is actually really significant. There's a great quote by Winston Churchill's mum, and she said, "When I left the dining room after sitting next to Mr. Gladstone, I thought he was the cleverest man in England. But after sitting next to Mr. Disraeli, I thought I was the cleverest woman in England." How people use words and language also describes how they make you feel, and how they make you feel is what really matters. A good charismatic leader, like my personal favorite, for example, Wim Hof, they will make you feel like you can take on the world because you have the power inside of you. They don't want to take credit and responsibility for your growth and your personal power. They just want to help you activate it and find it inside of yourself. They want you to feel independent and strong. A charismatic leader with darker intentions, let's say, uses feeling and language to manipulate you. So you'll feel profound emotions, but you are also dependent on the leader because that's where the power lives. Though they never outright say it, they kind of create the illusion that you are getting closer to your power inside of you, but you need them to get that. They're not trying to make you healthy and independent. They're trying to keep you looking for that power inside of you, which means you need them. They are the vehicle, the instrument to your personal power. And if there is something that you have become attached to, that is how they can keep you in their web. This is how so many really reasonable and intelligent adults are drawn into situations that they could never imagine. We all like to think, that would never be me. I would never get sucked into a cult or into a crazy situation. But I mean, maybe it's a tried example, but have you ever had just a crazy ex that has lied to you and you've believed it, or a crazy boss, or, been drawn into some family drama that you thought was true and then it turned out not to be, and then you look like a silly goose at the end of it? Because this is a really human, normal thing, and we're much easier to manipulate than we realize. And that's maybe to come full circle. That's why these conversations for me are so important, is the awareness and understanding and education. These are such great tools to be able to protect yourself. So you can call out bullshit when you sense it. You can listen to the red flags that start to appear in your body and in your nervous system when you're listening to somebody maybe even like Gafni.
So, in your journey, did your journey have a similar arc to that?
Yeah, exactly. That archetypal arc, right? And I realized at the end that the only way to actually really liberate and free myself was to forgive him. And part of that, I went back into his journey and to his pain and his suffering, and I could understand the complexity and the pain. And
Then we circle back to Christina, who is invited to share her story of forgiveness. She was able to see her abuser as a man who was suffering, and for her, forgiveness was freeing. I mean, this is again a situation where I find her presence so incredibly challenging. Again, not because of her, but because of the context. I'm really genuinely, truly happy for her that she was able to find peace and freedom. And I know how much that means to you. Many people are also able to find freedom in the same way that she was, to find that peace by being able to forgive the person and be able to understand their abuser a little bit and what drove their actions. That's absolutely fine, and I'm really happy for everybody who's able to get there by that means. This frustrates me. This conversation frustrates me though, because there is there is no understanding here of how loaded the concept of forgiveness is for people who've experienced SA and CSA. And that's really wild, considering Aubrey has made at the start of this conversation the very bold claim that everybody he's been with has experienced some form of it. So shouldn't he know a little bit better? Shouldn't he have more insight and understanding of, how big and complex a topic like that can be for a person? And I want to be really clear. Forgiveness is not a requirement for healing. You can accept and you can make your peace and find your freedom without needing to offer forgiveness. Forgiveness is a really, really personal choice. It's not the spiritually superior option that it's being framed as in this conversation. To quote Angel DeSantis, forgiveness is pushed when the truth threatens power. In my opinion, we're seeing an example of that here. Once we go through this, then as promised, Aubrey offers some thoughts on why he chose to work with Gafni again.
The first of these reasons, the first of three, is a simple claim of justice, that ultimately no person should be punished indefinitely without the opportunity to confront his accusers, to present his evidence or her evidence, and actually have some sort of adjudication. Now, Marc Gafni has been punished since 2006. He has not been able to deliver his message.
So it essentially seems to boil down to innocent until proven guilty is good enough for him. He's not there to, or he's not in a position to rubber stamp what's right or wrong. And that based on his interactions with Gafni, he feels that Gafni can be trusted as a safe person. It seems to come back down to, subjective feeling is more important than objective and material information. And the impression that I get from all of this is that Aubrey is happy to let Gafni be in control of the narrative, because Aubrey's become really attached to Gafni's message, what the paradigm shifting message that he's trying to put into the world. And I don't believe that Aubrey is a bad man, but he definitely comes across as one with some pretty serious blind spots. And there are even moments in this when it feels like it's hard not to believe that he's maybe in some ways deliberately in denial of what's going on with Gafni. And as we know already, when the message is put above the people that it's supposed to serve, that's when we make ourselves open to, and others open to, spiritual abuse, because we can't protect anybody anymore. We're not protecting ourselves, because all we care about is the mission, the message. That's where all our caretaking goes, is in that abstract idea. And everybody else is second to that. Overall, I think we're supposed to walk away from this with the sense that these are two noble men who worship the goddess. But I mean, I see a failure to adequately address serious public accusations. I see a devotion that feels a lot more like obsession, and just a whole bunch of performative spirituality. For me, this episode is a really great lesson in why it's so crucial to be able to have tough conversations, even with people you like, and even if it puts something that you want at risk. If you're uncomfortable with having hard conversations, then Me too. I'm still learning to get good at that. But the good news is that it's a skill that you can learn, and there are really amazing people that can teach you how to do it. There is a really great book. It's called The Courage to Be Disliked. And I think it's a great tool because in situations like these, it really is more important to be able to have the hard conversation than it is to worry about the other person's comfort or how they're going to feel about you afterwards. And the truth is, a safe person that's treated with respect, they're not going to begrudge you for asking tough questions to get clarity. In our final chapter, we're going to go back to the start. We're going to go back to the radical monogamy episode that sparked everything. And we're going to check it out. Now that we have more information, we have a fuller picture and more context, and we're going to see what we see. There is a really great quote that I wanted to share that I think sends us beautifully off from this part of the series into our final chapter. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place the first time. Thank you so much for being here. If you're still listening, drop a like, drop a comment, subscribe, stay tuned for the next episode. If you know anything at all about rabbis and how that works, or if you're a feminist and you have more info there, please drop your thoughts into the comments. If you noticed any other massaging, changing, if there's anything you feel like I got wrong or didn't see or didn't connect, please absolutely pop that into the comments too. If you have anything uplifting or inspiring to share, please drop that into the comments too. When you're commenting, always keep it respectful and kind. We're not trying to pull each other down here. We're trying to lift each other up. And maybe you even just want to share something that has really helped you to sort of pull back the veil and open your eyes and make better choices and better decisions for yourself and for other people. Thank you so much for your time, and I will catch you in our final chapter. Exciting.